Hi everyone, this is Wuju Senshi here, and I know it's been a long time since I've uploaded to my YouTube. Um, that's something I feel like I'm saying every single video, but I thought I owe it to people who've been watching my content to try and put out some another build guide. I said I was going to be doing that probably a long time ago, and it's much overdue. But yeah, here it is. So just some full disclosure here. I guess regarding the future of I just want to kind of get this out of the way at the beginning, saying that the future of my content and involvement with League in general is probably going to decrease a good amount. As many of you know, I'm a student, a medical student, and getting pretty busy these days, and that's how it's made it a little bit harder for me to, invest as much time in the game and energy, and be really try hard, grindy kind of player I used to be. So I guess, yeah, basically what I'm trying to say is I might not be streaming as much or putting out as much YouTube content. You probably already noticed that. And it's kind of uncertain, actually, if I'll be able to, continue being a content creator for, the foreseeable future. Definitely if I am going to continue, it'll be in a much lower capacity. But, and another thing I want to put out as a disclaimer right now is I am currently, my main is ranked Diamond 4. So I'm really, my ranks performance has not been very far from the best it's ever been, but people still ask me about advice regarding builds and things like that. So I'm gonna just give you what I think. You can take it with a grain of salt. You can take it or leave it. Of course, what I'm also gonna do in this video is tell you about kind of what my process, how I find these builds, how I, think of what builds I think would be good on you and stuff. So that way you don't have to be referencing my, Google Doc guide here all the time, which I'll link in the comments below as well, so that you can access what you see on the screen right now. But I'll just tell you kind of how to figure it out for yourself, what the best builds are based on what high elo U1 tricks are doing across the major servers. Because that's all I do. Some builds I kind of think up on my own, but most of them I'm just kind of getting from other E-mains who are doing well with these builds in high elo. So there's a lot of prefacing there. Just wanted to get it out there. So without further ado, I'll just jump into this. So the Yi rework, as you know, there's been a kind of tumultuous 1, 2, 3 months, however long it's been, of Yi being buffed, nerfed, constantly reworked, and I'd say a lot of things have changed comparing old Yi to new Yi. But at the same time, a lot of the standard builds are still very viable. I think just in general with Yi right now, there's tons of builds that can work. And it's not even so important for the sake of climbing. Builds are not even the most important thing most of the time. You can just pick one build and do it almost every single game with very little variation, and that's perfectly fine for climbing. It's not, I think Yi mains sometimes get caught up in thinking of these crazy new builds, and it's really not. If anything, it might just be a distraction from what's important, which is focusing on your actual gameplay and your macro. But yeah, like I said, the standard build for Yi that has been, Yi's build basically for as long as we can remember since the item rework with Kraken, Rageblade, this first line here, I just called it Ionian here. Kraken, Rageblade, Death Stance, Wits. That build is still perfectly viable. I think in general, based off stat websites I've looked at, I think BORK has a little bit of a higher win rate in terms of a first item power spike compared to Kraken, because Kraken's been nerfed and BORK works really well with new Yi and his Q changes and all that. But it's still fine. Kraken, Rageblade, DD Wits End, and you can make slight variations of that order. You could go Wits End third versus heavy AP, obviously. But this build is totally fine. It is going to be, I think, in my opinion, especially effective against tanks, really tanky enemies, where they have a lot of armor and the true damage from Kraken, Rageblade. Those two items are really good for shredding high armor targets, right? So this build's fine. Now, another build that I've seen a lot of high elo Yi mains doing this kind of thing, and I've tried it myself, and I really like it. It's the idea of this warrior build, which is not building a mythic item. I'm not saying never build it, but I'm saying you delay your mythic item until, third item at earliest, but fourth, fifth item even. Sometimes it's even my last item, and that's just because a lot of the mythic items right now are. None of them are really that good on Yi. Kraken used to be kind of Kraken and Dustblade were the main two that everyone was building, but both of them got nerfed. Dustblade, it got, not necessarily the item was nerfed, but like Yi's Dustblade build got nerfed, as you know, so you don't see people doing Dustblade crit as often. So a lot of the mythic items are just not as good, but the on-hit items are still really great. So the idea is with this build, you're rushing all of these items that are actually really good on Yi, and you get your mythic item later when you've already gotten the most important items in your build. So BORK Rageblade, you don't have to get Rageblade. You could skip Rageblade and go right into these other items. But yeah, starting with BORK into Rageblade Wits, Death Dance, you could get Death Dance third instead of fourth. Like, this order is not, it's just kind of an ideal or like a default, but you can switch it around definitely. But the idea is you're not getting a mythic until later. These items are just all really good, putting out really good damage, as well as having great defensive. I mean, primarily Wits and Death Dance, of course, is like a core defensive item for Yi. These items are just so nice compared to, you know, like Shield Bow. Sure, it gives you some defense, but Death Dance is way better for defense in my opinion. And I mean, in terms of DPS, like a Wit's End with BORK and Rageblade, you know, Kraken doesn't do any on-hit damage, so it doesn't really synergize with Yi's kit as much anymore. I'll try not to rant too much. I know sometimes my build guide videos get long, but basically there's a reason a lot of E-mains are building lots of like non-mythic items. They're rushing those items and getting mythics later. So you can give it a try and let me know what you think. Another build here, which is kind of similar to this warrior build, this Duelist Build, which primarily focuses on, basically you're going to get Shield Bow, and you're going to get it, you know, earlier rather than as like a fourth or fifth item. Yeah, basically it's just really good with dueling, with BORK and, with a BORK and Shield Bow combo. For your first three items, having those two items makes you, you know, a little bit of a drain tank. You're not like Season 10 Yi, but definitely it's really good at dueling. And I think there are situations where you really do want the Shield Bow earlier, as opposed to the warrior build where you don't have a mythic at all until later. Having an early Shield Bow in some games is really helpful when you don't want to build like a full tank item like Sunfire or something, but you also want to yeah, you also want to have some kind of defense, especially if they have some kind of burst or something. And especially in games where you can auto attack a lot and make use of the sustain, the lifesteal on in this build, it's really, really strong. I guess also, I don't know if I should be explaining this as I go. You can look at this guide yourself later and see it all for yourself. But I have kind of some pros and cons on the right column explaining like what I think are the strengths and weaknesses of each build, and recommended runes are here. Most of these builds, you know, nowadays, especially with Yi's buffed attack range, Lethal Tempo is king. I think it's best with almost every build. Even Dustblade builds, you know, Lethal Tempo still works quite well. Hail of Blades, I think, it's only something you would ever take, in my opinion, against really squishy enemy team comps. But even then, it's just, I think Lethal Tempo is a great default if you don't know what to pick. Just do it every game, and I don't think you'll ever regret it. Okay, so moving on. So the tank builds, Sunfire, as people are well aware of, has become popular on Yi lately, and it's going to get nerfed next patch. Is what I understand is they're going to nerf the on-hit damage it outputs, especially for champions that don't build a lot of extra HP items. But it's still, I think it'll still be viable on Yi, and especially in games where you need to be more of a front line and you have a lot of other damage on your team that's going to be probably carrying you, if that's the kind of game it looks like, especially if enemy team comp looks like a game where enemy team comp looks really difficult for you to kind of carry against. If it's one of those games, tanky becomes better. So in those situations, most people know this build. This Juggernaut build is what I call it, which is BORK Rageblade into Sunfire. That is definitely you know, a nice default build for when you want to run tanky, but it is going to be lower DPS, kind of lower carry potential compared to these standard on-hit builds with damage mythics. But yeah, again, there are situations where it makes sense to run tanky. There's another version of tanky that I don't see many people do, but I've seen some high Yis do it, and I think it makes a lot of sense, and they are effective with it. It works for them in certain games, and it's going BORK into basically straight tank immediately. I think the more popular version of this build is going BORK into Sunfire, but when I think about it, and I did a little bit of math on it behind it as well, I think BORK into Titanic, if you're going to go this really tanky build, it's better to go BORK Titanic before BORK into Sunfire, especially after next patch when it's going to get nerfed Sunfire. So yeah, BORK into Titanic makes you a pretty tanky, and as well as with BORK Lifesteal, you'll be really tanky early on. Definitely going to have lower damage, obviously. But yeah, it just makes you a champ that can still do lots of damage, especially if the enemy team has squishies, where you can blow them up even if you have these tank items, but you'll still be a tank yourself. And another thing I should note about this is that Frostfire Gauntlet, most people don't do this on Yi. Most people are going to go Sunfire with a tank build, but Frostfire Gauntlet gives you twice the amount of HP per legendary item compared to Sunfire. So in games where you don't need the tenacity aspect of Sunfire as much and you'd rather just be even tankier, have more HP, Frostfire Gauntlet is a viable option. And there are high elo Yi mains that have done that and have been able to do well in games with it. But it's very situational, I'd say. Sunfire is a good default if you don't know what to do. Okay. Let's see, how long am I going here? 11 minutes? Okay, not too bad. So, Dustblade builds. People often, what I hear from a lot of Yi mains asking this question of, so is Dustblade Yi dead? Like, is Dustblade just completely, we can't, it's just completely troll to build it anymore. Basically, we have to go on builds only. And the answer, in my opinion, and a lot of other Yi mains have kind of, I get the sense from other Yi mains that they agree with this, is that no, Dustblade build is not dead. There are variations of it now, like the on-hit variation of Dustblade that can work. And even the version of Dustblade where you still build crit items, there are still Yi mains doing that as well. Again, Yi mains in high elo, and they're still doing well with it. It's really just situational, and I'd say Dustblade is, it's not the kind of build I'd recommend doing every game anymore. Very, very far from that. But especially against enemies that are like lots of squishies and lots of free resets, Dustblade still works really well. So the on-hit variation of Dustblade is BORK Rush. You've noticed most of these builds are BORK Rush, I think, and the data seems to support this as well. BORK Rush is just a very strong, it's almost never bad, kind of a start on your Yi build, and then after that you figure out what you're building if you're not sure yet. But BORK Rush is almost never a bad bet right now. Just synergizes perfectly with everything about how Yi is right now. So yeah, BORK Rush into Dustblade, into these other on-hit items. Wit's End before Death Stance because you want more on-hit damage to be able to actually one-shot people, and then Death Stance later on. It's kind of like a standard on-hit style for Dustblade. That's how I would, that's the default build I would use for on-hit Dustblade. But these other builds, which another disclaimer, I have not been playing a lot of Dustblade. I have not tested all these builds. I mean, this one you can say I don't know. I don't think I'm even going to talk about this build here because it's very experimental. But some of these builds I have not tested either at all or very little. It's more like stuff I've seen other Yi mains do, and even then, it's rare when I see Dustblade built on Yi and high elo and actually do well. So another version of Dustblade is Rush and Collector. If you really want to snowball, you would get a Collector before Dustblade, because Dustblade right now is actually a pretty weak rush item on Yi. The on-hit proc is reduced by your Q, right? If you Q and the Q on-hits proc the Dustblade, on-hit thing, it reduces the damage a lot. So Collector is, in my opinion, a better first item for these lethality Dustblade builds, and then you get Dustblade second. So that's how I would do it, and then you can go into the on-hit items after Dustblade Collector, or you can go into Rageblade and LDR. These items together, this is like the optimal one-shot combo. Having Collector Dustblade with Rageblade and LDR, that's like the most damage you can do with Dustblade in one Q and auto. It's less about extended team fighting, more about one-shotting. But I mean, it's Rageblade it's still Rageblade, so you can still team fight extensively with it. And then this haste crit build, I said I wasn't going to talk about it. It's just a build that I thought of, and I was wondering. You're probably looking at it and thinking it's super troll, and it might be. So I'm not even gonna bother talking about it. It's just an experiment I had going in my head. I might remove it later. This last build, Headhunter. So this build can work with either Gale Force or Eclipse, but both of those items, like, this is another super, super, super situational build. There's a Yi main on NA, Dandelion Yi, who likes to run Gale Force in his games in NA Grandmaster. And Gale Force can be a really powerful playmaking tool on Yi. So that's one of the things that makes it, this build viable. Eclipse is probably less viable than Gale Force, honestly, but I mean, both of these builds is kind of the same idea to like give you a strong early item power spike that gives you some kind of playmaking potential. And then other than that, it's just kind of standard Yi items, Yi on-hit items. Okay. Whew. That was a lot of talking. The short and sweet of this build guide, the summary, is that I would basically go Lethal Tempo on-hit builds almost every game, unless you really, unless you just love Dustblade builds to death, or these other weird builds like Headhunter. And sometimes, they can be good. These other builds can be good, or even more effective than the standard on-hit builds. But the thing is, it's really, it's never bad. It's never bad, I'll say, to go the on-hit builds and doing those every single game. And most of the time, they are actually the best build. So just doing that every single game, going Kraken or Shield Bow are the two builds, the two mythics I would recommend the most, and having your builds based around those two mythics, Kraken and Shield Bow, and doing BORK Rush every game, I think again is very safe. Yeah, that's pretty much the summary of my build guide. The last thing I wanted to show you here was this. So this is a website, onetricks.gg/champion/ranking/master Yi, that I think I saw on the Yimo Discord. And looking at this is like the perfect website I've been looking for a long time. Basically, when I make my build guides, like I said, most of it is just from stalking other Yi mains and seeing what works for them in high elo, and a little bit is just thinking of things myself, and then I'll test it, and if I like it, I'll keep it on the guide. But basically what you want to do, which is what most of you already know, is to just look at what high elo Yi one tricks are doing. Be really careful about, emphasis on one tricks, okay? Looking at data, especially for a champion like Master Yi, he's very misunderstood by a lot of the League community. Even pros that play him, they'll run it down with him or just play him completely incorrectly, and they might still pop off with him just because they're good players. But for the people who, if you really want to know the nuances of how to build Yi, how to play Yi, you want to look to the one tricks. I really stand firmly by that. And so that's why this website is perfect. It shows all of the one tricks on major servers. So it takes out, people who are like rank 1 on like Turkey, for example, which is a much smaller server. And, you want to really focus on the one tricks on the major servers. It looks at Master Plus one tricks on the major servers, NA, Korea, EU West. China doesn't have data available, which is, I'm guessing that's why it's not on this list. You'll click on their names. Sinerias, as I'm sure as you all know, or most of you know, is probably the best Yi main in the world right now, and doing his challenger climb on EU West. You just go to this profile here, you'll just look at what items they're building, and you can just copy that. That's all there is to it. And there's a lot of Yi mains that are doing different things. They're not all running the same bread and butter build, right? So there is a lot of customizability. Like, you don't have to, there's not one or two builds that are viable and best and everything else sucks. There's a lot of variation that you can, take advantage of to kind of meet your personal playstyle preferences, as well as like what's best for the certain game you're in. So this guy, Sinerias, who I talked to this guy a lot, he really likes BORK into Kraken Rush. He does this pretty much every game. And then he's after that going Death Dance or Rageblade. So that's also something I've been doing a lot recently as well, and it works well for me too. So that's just kind of, maybe this doesn't come across to you as like really groundbreaking information, but this is just kind of, this is really all there is to my process and how I, figure out what the best builds are. And Of course, I do a lot of thinking for myself and testing things. I don't necessarily just blindly follow what other people do, but it's a great way to kind of get the information and start thinking about things for yourself. But yeah, I think that's really all I wanted to say for this video. I'll be doing my best to put out YouTube videos every now and then and keep streaming whenever I have the time. Like I said, it's going to get busier for me in terms of my personal life and my school and all that, especially after November. But we'll see. And I still am planning on doing the 5th episode of the Yi seminar with most likely Cowsep, Sinerias, Dandelion Yi, probably Scarbo as well, and maybe another EOS main. We'll see if he's going to ultimately be able to come on. And there might be other people too, who knows. But yeah, if this is content you enjoy, I really appreciate your feedback and telling me how I can improve it or what you liked about it or what you didn't. Yeah, and hopefully I'll see you at the E-Seminar. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Take care.